Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rylan Qualley. What we do here is we try to interview people about ambition. I want to find out about training, nutrition, mindset, and anything that people do to excel and what really sets them apart from others. Today's great guest is Ryan Savage. He's amplified this to me my whole life. He's been a great mentor to me, a boxing coach, and even a boss at one point. So he is the president of Boxing Canada right now. He is also the president and the founder of United Boxing Club. Ryan Savage was a national level champion. And let's not forget to mention that he's also a lawyer and a family man, father of two and a husband. So this guy is always busy, always doing something, and he's always willing to give back. He's done everything for United, completely volunteer just to give back to the sport. So really an incredible person to listen to, and there's some great nuggets of wisdom in here. I do apologize for a little bit of editing issues. I had to take out some background sound, and there was even at one point we dropped the call. But I think I did a pretty decent job of editing, so you'll get all the good take-home messages, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, here is Ryan Savage. Hey, Ryan. Thanks for joining me. How you doing today, man?
Fantastic, my friend. How are you?
I'm pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. So you're out at the cabin here. I see you're enjoying your Sunday. That's great. Family man always makes sure that he's getting away, work hard and rest with the family, right?
Well, I'm actually here by myself. You're solo without the family. So the opposite of that. Every now and again, you need time away from the family and the kids. So yeah, that's what this is.
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
respect
Yeah,
that. Absolutely.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
there's
That's
a,
funny.
there's a work life and self balance for sure. You need
Exactly,
that.
exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, let's dive into it. I give like a little bit of a rough intro for you from what I know about who you are and stuff like that. But why don't you give your own kind of resume, so to speak, as far as boxing and where you are right now with boxing as a coach, and then also in life.
Sure. I grew up in Southdale in Winnipeg and started joining boxing when I was about 12 years old and made my way up to the provincial team and then eventually the national team and spent about 7 or 8 years on the national team training and retired my career in 2003 once I got my call to the bar as a lawyer. And so I spent the last few years of my career both in law school and a member of the national training team or the national boxing team. So got a lot of great experiences through that, a lot of great travel, and most importantly, got all my university paid for through boxing, which was fantastic. And so I retired, like I say, in 2003. I opened up United Boxing Club in 2006. Um, Prior to that, JT Smith, one of my co-founders of United, and I were running a club elsewhere, but we started United in 2006. So I've been running that since 2006, and that's been a great sort of venture to be a part of. And I've been a part of the board of Boxing Canada for about 15 plus years, and so I've moved up my way, and now I'm in the top position as president of Boxing Canada. So still heavily involved with the sport, just at different levels, not spending as much time coaching as I used to, a little bit more time just trying to improve the sport at the national level and particularly in Manitoba, and particularly at our gym.
That's awesome. And also, I just want to make sure you throw in there that you are, a successful lawyer and a family man, husband of, and two kids, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Married, two
Yeah.
kids. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a well accomplished life, my man. That's awesome. So let's dive into the start a little bit because I do love your background and I always love hearing why someone got into the sport of boxing. And I know roughly about it, but why don't you describe, that evolution of, you're playing a few different sports and then boxing kind of takes hold.
Yeah, I was pretty small as a kid, and I was, I would say, hyperactive and bouncing all over the map. And I think my mom was wanting to get me into some kind of sport that was a little bit more serious than just playing in a bunch of different sports. And so that I was going to, commit to more seriously. And I wanted to go to an individual sport. I was playing only team sports at that point, hockey and soccer and sports like that. But I was attracted to the individual sport dynamic because I just wanted to have a little bit more sense of control over, whether I won or lost. And so started looking at combat sports, partly because of my small weight. I wanted a weight specific sport. And so I was looking at possibly judo or boxing or karate or, something along those lines, and ultimately chose boxing. And, certainly glad I did. I got to meet a lot of good people, as you know, in the sport of boxing there's all sorts of, fantastic people. And so started a gym and I was, I think the youngest kid by far, by a decade plus in the gym. And so I was taken under the wings of many people, adult people who were coach or training there. And obviously the coaches all took me under their wing. And so that I think helped me in terms of motivating me to come down a little bit more often. And, that then it turned into competitions. And then one competition turned into one out of town trip, in Grand Forks. And then that turns into a trip to Minnesota. Then all of a sudden you're traveling, all around North America. And so, it's sort of a gradual progression. And, certainly had lots of defeats, but I had lots of success too. And so that sort of motivates you to want to train harder and do more and do better. And so, my mom was not a big fan of beatboxing. She didn't like it at all, but I think she saw the changes that were occurring in me because of boxing. And so my coaches were pretty good in communicating with my mom about expectations and particularly in school, and making sure that I wasn't losing out on school because of my participation in boxing. And I think it worked the exact opposite. Like I was a C student when I first started, and through boxing learned how to dedicate my time, how to get things done before I moved on to the next thing. And so if I wanted to participate in boxing, if I wanted to go to a competition, I first had to do my homework. I first had to do my assignments, and that for sure motivated me to get it done right, and then be able to really focus on my boxing stuff and my competition when it was time. And so I went from a C student, as a 12, 13-year-old kid, just starting boxing, to graduating high school as the valedictorian with honors, across the board. So I dedicate that, or I say that's almost entirely as a result of boxing, and just, my love for it, and the fact that I wanted to, do good in boxing, and so needed to focus my efforts on school as well. So I that's for sure tied to me in my mind.
Yeah, that's very powerful how it has that overlap with us, right? That, especially I love how you tied the two together, and it was at the right time to expose you to that idea of will, and like you have work to do and go get it done. Now, you had said something that was powerful to me was just being a C student and having that evolution within your character. What were some, kind of, was it pretty intuitive at that point to be like, okay, you just got to work if you want to go get to this? Or did you have a bit of an internal battle with yourself to get over basically that lazy bug, being a lazy teen and stuff like that? Or did it come pretty intuitive to you?
Well, like I say, I mean, I think it's as a result of the sport, particularly boxing, but I think particularly in individual sport, it taught me the need to be selfish, to focus primarily on me. And so, notwithstanding that you're part of a bigger club and you're part of a bigger team and you're not the only person in the gym, in terms of competition, in terms of your individual goals, it is all about you. And so you need to be selfish. And so, I when other people were maybe going out, staying late, going to 7-Eleven to hang out, or going to drink, or do all those things, I was pulling away from those things because I knew that's not what I needed to do to get what I wanted. And so, it taught me that sort of self-discipline early on, that if I want these things, then I got to work hard for them, and I got to give up other things, and I got to make sure that I commit the time that I need to school, or I'm not going to be able to box at all. And so, you know, I think at an early age, it set the right expectations, the right tone in terms of how to, develop in life, I think.
Yeah, I think that's great that it evolves your character like that, because that's something I still see to this day with some of the guys we work with is like it shouldn't, boxing should actually be kind of the foundation for all of your discipline and every other realm in your life. If you're lazy in something, the odds are it's going to bleed into your boxing. But if you're
Yeah.
on point with your boxing and you want to be on point with your boxing, the rest of the realms of your life are going to need to follow suit.
Yeah, like the best example of that is and I know we've all had it. Anybody who's been in boxing for any amount of fights has had the one fight or more where they should not have lost, that they lost only as a result of their lack of preparation or their lack of training. And so, just to your point, that's for me, that's sort of what defined it for me, is like I don't ever want to feel that. Worst feeling ever is that, when you lose something and it's only because of you lost it because you didn't prepare, you weren't ready enough to get it done. And so, that just shows you that you always got to be ready and you always got to be prepared and you got to bust your ass to get what you want, right? So um, in a sport like boxing, it brings it home, I think, much clearer than maybe in other sports, like particularly a team sport where it's easy to blame others or, soften the blow where it's just you and your opponent in the ring, and you walk away and your hand is not raised, and the only reason your hand is not raised is because you didn't do what you needed to do in the gym. It's a horrible feeling.
Yeah, yeah. I always remember you saying that in the gym, and it was a very powerful thing. Is like never lose from lack of work ethic because that is your
Right.
choice. That's your
Yeah.
responsibility, and it's a continuous responsibility. So you're evolving in the sport of boxing, and like you say, it goes from one match to the other, and then so at what point does it key into you? It's like I'm good at this. Because by the way, I want you to also mention how good you got because I think you kind of dressed over how successful you were. So I want you to describe that a little bit.
I was at the upper level, right? I mean, my view on goal setting is, you have long-term goals, and that might be to be the best at something or to be Olympic champ or whatever you define that long-term goal. But I think the more important goals are the short-term goals that lead you up to the longer-term goal. And so, when I first started, my goal was just to be, good. Like, it wasn't to be the best. I didn't want to necessarily go to the Olympics. I wasn't sure. I liked the sport. I wanted to try out, and I wanted to sort of get to the level where I saw everybody else at, because I was new, everybody was better than me. And I want to get where they're at. And then once you get there, you're like, okay, well, I like this now. Like, I kind of want to be a little bit better than good. And then, when you get better, all of a sudden, you're in the upper echelon and you're like, okay, well, I'm now in the top crowd and I think I can maybe make it to the very top. And so I can be the best. And so, I think it's sort of a gradual, progression in that way, and or at least it was for me. And so, I don't think I ever considered myself to be the best at boxing, at any point, but I certainly was successful. I had, a lot of benefits from it. I got to travel all over the world. I got, lots of funding from it. And so, it was a balance for me of balancing, what I realistically expected to get from the sport and, what I was going to get from life after sport. And so I think I did a good job of balancing that. And, it's unfortunate. I came pretty close to making the Olympics, but, not quite. And, I was close to making another run in 2004, but, with my getting my call to the bar in 2003, I just, I made the tough decision that I just wasn't able to put another year of work into it to try to make that run. So, I pulled out, and, it was always, what if thoughts, but generally I'm happy with how my career went and where I am now and what it's brought me in terms of benefits from the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't think there's too many athletes that won't live the rest of their life with a list of what ifs, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you said it best. You can't change time. It's like what do we have left to do with it? But again, you keep dressing by this. So you were a three-time national champ at your weight class. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a three-time national champ at my weight class. I was seven at least. I think it might have been 8 years, but 7 or 8 years on the national team. And so I was carded for 7 years, and I think I was one additional year on the national team when I was not carded. But as a carded athlete, you get government funding, and so you're sort of part of the upper team. So while I was sort of second in Canada, there was one guy, who was better me in my division. I was still a part the top echelon in terms of travel and being sent around. And so I got a ton of travel opportunities there. I had, some pretty disappointing losses, including to the two athletes who were better than me in the other 4 years. And so, interestingly, of those two athletes who beat me through those 4 years that I was not national champion, there's two athletes who beat me through those 4 years. And one athlete was put in jail for murder, for murdering his wife, and spent over a decade in jail. I think he's just out recently. And the second one is one of the, I think, presidents of the Satan's Choice subdivision, or vice president of Satan's Choice subdivision of the Hells Angels. And so he just got shot last year, and I think now he's in a wheelchair and not doing very well. And so you hear those kind of stories, and things could have gone different for me, and I wish I would have not lost those individuals, and would have, because those are the two people who lost. I lost two for the 1996 Olympic Games and 2000 Olympic Games, and so obviously I wish things would have gone differently, but I'm sure so do they in terms of where they are right now in their life. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really curious about your experience with that high caliber and the mindset that you would utilize to prepare for whether it's international or those big fights. Like, how would you mentally prepare to say, okay, I got to bring my A game? What were some of the kind of routines and stuff like that that you would utilize?
Yeah, typically you're training 6-8 weeks out, depending on your fitness level, but for any specific competition. And so, you're training hard, and then as you identify what tournament you're going to, or possibly what opponent you're going to be fighting, you get to work on specific strategies in terms of how to best fight those expected opponents that you might have. And so I was pretty disciplined on the cardio side, like that. I was willing to put the time in that I needed to make sure my cardio was in check. I was fairly quick, like speed wise, and I was fairly technical in terms of my skill sets. Where I think I lacked was power, and that had pretty important consequences, particularly through my heyday in my sort of highlight years of my career, because they switched the scoring system in boxing to a computerized scoring system. So it was like a little Nintendo box that each judge would have, and they would push the red or blue button based on whether they saw a point. The problem was that they would only push the button unless the point basically, was strong enough to snap your whole body back or snap your head back. So any sort of, glancing blow or blow that landed, but not, sufficient to jar the guy, often wasn't scored. And so you were getting, it was kind of disappointing. The crowd wasn't really liking it, because you were getting these pretty intense fights with scores of like 3-2 or 2-1. And, not sure how it's possible that both fighters, throw 100 punches each, per round, and the final score is like 2-1 or 3-2. And so that significantly changed the way that you had to fight and had to train and prepare for competition. And so it was a little bit of a struggle for me, because it highlighted an area that I wasn't strong on. And so I had to really work hard on trying to deal with that. And like, how do I get that strength that I don't have that others do? And how do I get that, tight defense that others have that I didn't at the time? And so I did my best. I was pretty good at heart shaped guard and tight defense towards the end, but there for sure was a couple disappointing losses where it really was about the strength of the blow and how hard you hit, and whether the judges scored it or not. And so I generally took every fight the same way, is don't leave anything behind. Leave every ounce of energy you have in the ring, because again, the worst thing to do is have a fight and then know that you didn't give your all, right? And so obviously sometimes I disappointed myself in that way, but I generally, my goal was to give everything I had, do the best I can. I was pretty confident with my defense, towards the end. And so, I was generally comfortable that I probably was not going to get knocked out. I've never been knocked out, 180 fights. I've never been knocked out cold. I've been dropped and I've been hurt and, things like that. But in terms of an out cold knockout, I was pretty confident that probably wasn't going to happen to me. And so it was just a matter of not losing, right? You're there to win, and you're there to do your best. And so I came ready. I like pretty much, I would say, across the board, except for the couple disappointing losses that I had as a kid, as an athlete on the national team. I typically gave my best, and sometimes I won, sometimes I lost, but it typically wasn't because I was under prepared.
Yeah, so I like this mindset, and I'm not gonna lie, just knowing the person that you are, this makes sense that this was your mind frame. I'm gonna leave it all out there, and so that gave you the confidence to go forward into the ring. It wasn't You didn't waste time spending what ifs. You didn't spend time thinking, what if I don't have it? It's like, no, but I'm gonna bring it. I'm gonna be the best I can, and I'm not gonna leave any regret in the ring. And we'll see where the score ends up. Does that kind of
Right.
summarize it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, like looking back, things that I wish would have done better is tracking my performance, my training plan, because, I think the best way to go through life and through sport is in that way, do your absolute best, give everything you got, and focus on what you can control. And sometimes you can't control the outcome, especially in a sport like boxing, which is very subjective, and we all know the disappointments and the robberies that happen in our sport. But what you can control is how hard you train and what you do to bring the best you to the fight on fight day. And so what I wish I would have done a little bit better is tailored my training based on how my results were. I wasn't very good at like writing down my workouts, for example, and then whether I won or lost, going back to that workout and saying, okay, well, let's think about where things went right or where things went wrong or what needs to be changed in the game plan leading up to that fight. Right? You did it at a high level, but I don't think I did as good of a job as I should have done. Particularly without writing everything out and then revisiting that in writing. I think that's an important thing for athletes to do nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, as a strength coach or someone who's trying to improve their strength, it's clear cut numbers. It's like I lifted this for this reps. Okay, we're gonna progress into this the next week. So it's very intuitive at that level. But on a skill based sport like yours, it's a little bit different, right? Because but at the same time, it doesn't mean you can't still be aware and be like, okay, well, this was the problem. Let's address it. No different than I'm weak in the squat. Let's address it. Let's try to build up around the squat form. And I think we get caught up in that the too much differentiation between a sport or like an activity like strength training, because it's so objective that we don't realize we can be objective with our progressions. And I think this is, dare I say, inherently sometimes just a laziness that we don't think that, hey, there's more work beyond just showing up for your work. There's planning the work. So what I would really love to know is if you could give me like a rough description on what your training was like at the high level for conditioning, how many days a week boxing, and what was the nutrition like?
Training, it was typically 2-a-day training sessions, depending on where you're at specifically relative to the fight. The intensity would differ, whether it's a long-term run or a wind sprint, for example, in the mornings, and then your afternoon trainings were either, cardio-based, technical-based, or sparring sessions. Typically, they fell within one of those three. And as you're ramping up towards a competition, you typically would give your body a little bit more rest, and so higher intensity workouts, but less volume, and so less number of workouts. And so, I was pretty good, like I say, with the cardio. I was pretty diligent. I was the first one in the gym and the last one out in terms of putting in the work, right? And then, there's some aspects of sports psychology that I got involved with later in my career that, again, looking back, I wish it was something that was a much bigger part of my training and my plan in terms of, the psychological aspects of the sport. You know, burnout and sometimes working too hard isn't necessarily always the best route, right? Or working hard isn't always necessarily the best way to do it if there's an issue there. And so I was overtrained, I think, in some cases, and you'll see that in performance. And that just goes back to I wish I would have then gone back to my training plans to sort of picked up on some of those issues a little bit sooner. But you're training, like I say, we were sparring pretty high levels, and when you're sparring with the national team and there's national team coaches there, you're at different weight divisions, and so typically you're sparring with one weight division up, one weight division down, and so there's a lot of balancing that goes on in any boxing club, especially at the national level, in terms of the pecking order, right? In terms of making sure that the bigger guy wants to let me know that I I'm not as big as him and I'm not as strong as him. I'm not as good as him, and sort of vice versa. And so some of that gets sorted out in the ring, but it was a pretty good vibe in terms of everybody's there. You're doing something special, like you're at the national level and you're training for an international competition, that the chance to represent your country. And so there's that appreciation that we're all here to try to accomplish our individual goals. And generally I think that the team was pretty supportive of each other. There was obviously like personal dynamics and issues, but generally the team was pretty good to work with. And you knew that being part of that is what you needed to grow and to improve, right? Is to tap into that the skills of others and the experiences of others, and how other people do it.
Yeah, I think that's something that I didn't learn until way later, really, actually, after my career tail end, was how it's like this beautiful mix of an individualized performance, but it's a team activity. Like you need a supportive culture. You're gonna have some individual things, but if you don't have someone to hold hand pads with, you don't have someone pushing on the bag, someone to go runs with,
Yeah.
someone to do sprint
Yeah.
drills, you need a sparring partner. Like it is not an individualized training experience. And like you say, you end up creating a culture really around that. So why don't you speak a little bit to that, what that dynamic was like and how important you think, and do you see people miss that?
Well, that's I think that the culture that you need to breed success is everybody pushing everybody, right? Whether it's an individual sport or a team sport, I think you need to try to get that mindset and that atmosphere where everybody wants to help push each other. The reality is in boxing, especially in boxing, where it's a combat sport, and any one of those, well, not anyone, but some of those individuals could very well be your competition in the following year, right? That they might move up a division, down a division. Happens all the time where, somebody who was your training partner then becomes your opponent. And, you need to differentiate that and get over that, and still learn how to work together to improve each other. He'll get better by virtue of working with me, but I'll get better by virtue of working with him. And we'll let whoever wins, we'll start that out in the ring when it happens. So just going back, I think that's the critical aspect to any sort of grooming structure of an elite level athletes, to make sure that they're constantly exposed to people who are at least as good as them, probably better, right? And just so you're constantly growing and building on your skill sets. And sometimes that's the extra weight, or the because they're in a higher weight division, helps give you that sense. But you want to try to get as much balance as you can in terms of different skills and different approaches to the sport. I was one of those people that I had all sorts of different coaches, right? Many individual personal coaches here in Winnipeg, but also many coaches that I worked with as part of the national team through 7 or 8 years on the national team. And every coach has their own different perspective. Every coach teaches a little bit differently, and so I was, I think, pretty good at just listening to everybody and taking in everything that everybody said and trying to think how that best worked for me. And in some cases, I concluded it didn't work for me at all, and so I would disregard it, and that would be fine. But I took everything that came at me and tried to mold it into becoming the best fighter that I thought I could be, in light of what my natural strengths were. Like I say, speed and technique, I think, were things I was strong at. I was not very strong, and so I needed to accommodate some of the information that people were giving to me as a coach, to try to adjust that to the style that I had and what I thought was going to be best for me. And so, all sorts of value in terms of being exposed to different coaches and different ideas, right? And sometimes you'll hear something that might not sound right or might not, seem right, but you just got to give it a shot. And then sometimes there's like Vitality sometimes has some, ideas a little bit different, but they're the more you put them into practice, they are sound and they work. And if ultimately, if something works and is effective, then it gets the job done, right? And so not everything is orthodox. Some things are unorthodox, and it's okay to be unorthodox. It's okay to have those, different skills that other people aren't, they don't have and they don't expect, because they're a little bit unorthodox, right?
Absolutely. I really value that perception that you have, because I really try to do a lot of the same, because you end up with having different coaches. You end up having coaches that are like appreciate a certain style like this, and some appreciate like this. And one of the things that I noticed with like I had this big variety between like Kent, you, and JT, and I was able to, like, you were always that in between that had these almost like openness, like there's not just one way, there's many ways. And so what I would really love to hear from you is, and I know it's kind of probably a tough question, but what were some like key lessons that if you were to, tell a new upcoming athlete that you think maybe they haven't learned or have learned that were really critical to your development? Or like let's 2 to 3 big ones that you're like, oh, you know what, that was a big lesson.
Well, for sure, the number one would be losing where you know you lost because you didn't train and come prepared. That's the best life lesson I think anybody can learn, right? It just, there's nothing more important than that in terms of if you want something, then bust your ass to get it and be prepared when the time comes, so that you're ready at that moment. And so, I think for sure that's the number one. Like I say earlier, you know. Being in a sport and wanting something so bad, like when you're an elite level athlete, and this goes, I think probably across the board, those are athletes who would die for what they want. Like, without question, give me an Olympic gold, no problem. I'll die the next day. They want it so bad. Right. And so, that also sets up a pretty significant disappointment for the people who don't get it, right? Want that dream, want that outcome, work hard, do everything they're supposed to do, and still don't get it. And like I say, I think having gone through the experiences and having retired now for many years and being able to reflect back on my career and my life, I just wish that I would have, while keeping in mind the long-term goal, focused a little bit more on the short-term goals that lead up to that long-term goal. And so whether you make it to the Olympics or not, whether you become the best or not, if instead you become in the upper echelon, or if instead you've turned your body from something that was maybe not something to be proud of to a piece of art, and something that you've sculpted through all hard work and dedication, and all of the other side benefits that you get through going down the path to that long-term goal, don't lose sight of that, right? I think athletes get sometimes too focused about, I need to be this, right? I need to be the best at this, and I want it now, and I'll do anything I need to. And that's good, and that's fine, and that's the passion I think you need. But you got to enjoy the ride, right? You got to make sure that the path along the way is with smaller goals and objectives that you can accomplish, and then modify as you need be, but just be happy with the ride, right? Don't be too concerned about the ultimate outcome. If you get it, great, but if you don't, you still had a good ride down the path that you set.
Yeah, I remember last time we chatted, you had one of my favorite quotes to this day is the process is the result. And
Mm,
that's so powerful. That's powerful for anyone in any realm of life. Is that if you might have, like you say, this idea or this concept, this dream in your head, yes, that's great and go towards it. But if this goal is like if you can't appreciate that the process of getting there is a great version of yourself,
mm,
then like that's not the whole idea, right? You want to be really the idea of who you are is the process. Like I love that, right? Because that's really key. Because now
right.
you become, I'm a hardworking person, I show up to train, and I think that's what really provided you so much confidence as well, is that you valued who you were and who you were trying to be in the process. So it didn't, like, in some ways it probably didn't feel like work, it felt like just your identity.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I
I
agree.
think that's beautiful. So, um, tell me a little bit about the evolution out of the sport and into starting your own gym. That's an incredible feat on its own.
Yeah. So, I was actively involved in coaching as an athlete for probably the latter half of my career, so a decade plus, where I was, competing, but also coaching. Coaching is a great way to learn as an athlete as well. But once I retired, I was wanting to give back to the sport in some way, and wanted to work with athletes to be able to, bring them the experiences that I was able to get from the sport. And so, met up with JT and started to just coach with him at a like a community center. We were sometimes bumped by the bingo that they were running, and sometimes we were allowed to run, sometimes we weren't, and so we struggled for a couple of years, and then finally in 2006 we decided it was time to try to lease our own spot and run our own business, and so we set it up, and it worked well. JT and I were I think a really good team, and we complemented each other really well, and at that time for many years, the focus was really on elite athletes, right? We were there producing provincial and eventually national team members. And so, that was a great process that I was happy to be a part of. And then as I got married and then had small children, my focus on the gym had to change a little bit, and I wasn't able to devote the hours in the gym holding hand pads that I used to be able to. And so the gym at that point took a little bit of a shift and sort of went through a regrowing process. JT ultimately chose to do his own venture, and then the gym sort of had a little bit of a regrowth where we built up on our membership, and we created a good gym where we treat everybody the same, and people come in as recreational members and they learn the same technical stuff that some of the elite level athletes are working on and learning. And that's been a great process. And then of course we've now grown to become a pretty prominent gym in the city with some success both provincially and nationally in terms of elite competition, but also just being a good community member in terms of what we do for the community generally, and the partnerships we have with charitable organizations, the amount of money that we've raised for charitable organizations. And so really proud to be part of something that is sort of bigger than just a boxing club.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that's part of the mission statement and something that you've really tried to embed in the nature of the organization. I loved that the name is United, right? And the idea of naming the gym United is so powerful because of the ethics that you guys ensure that the all of the individuals stay committed to helping one another, stay committed to helping the program. And I think, you really see that culture in the gym. So one of the things I find really interesting too was the idea that you create this idea with the clients to treat them like athletes, and how unique that is. Oh, I lost them before we left off. What I was getting to right before I lost was, I love this idea of United being united. So what's so cool is that, in gyms, they have a very intimidating scene, and United kind of pushes away from this culture. It's able to create a welcoming environment. As we said, boxing is a team sport. And then on top of that, making people feel like an athlete when they're just off the street. Did you guys initially just think, this is a great way to have a culture? And did you see a need for it?
Yeah. I think that was intentional. I think for sure that it was something that I think both JT and I wanted to set in terms of a tone. I think our gym has always been sort of welcoming, less so when the only people in the gym are, elite level national team athletes, right? So obviously a little bit more welcoming now that we have, a large number of recreational people who, people at all levels, right? But it was for sure an intentional thing that United be somewhere that is welcoming, that is open, that is, community minded, and sort of on that paid forward system that we try to operate on.
Yeah, and that creates a different culture altogether, right? Because what I think is really cool too, and I want to come back to something you said earlier, is that and it's something that sounds, the word selfish sounds bad to individuals, especially if you tell an athlete that they should be selfish or that they are selfish. That doesn't mean that's everything in your life. That just means that you're very goal oriented towards your goal. So you have this beautiful in between where it's like, you need a level of selfishness, which is just your individual responsibility and goals, and then also including this environment, right? So that that you need to balance this with your teammates. You need to be there for your teammates too sometimes, and to create that culture. And you guys had great success. So why don't you talk a little bit about the great success, maybe how you led into getting the Fab Four that I remember.
Yeah, we, I think it's starts with setting the tone that you just spoke of in terms of an open environment where people feel comfortable. At the elite level, they might not be intimidated in the same way a recreational person would be, but where you have a coach who's closed-minded and only sees one way of doing things, it's pretty divisive if the athlete doesn't share that perspective, right? And so being able to work with athletes and being able to adjust to their individualness and sort of my individualness, and being able to explain things as just suggestions for improvement, and having that sort of open collaborative relationship between coach and athlete, I think was what caused us to grow as fast as we did at the high level. And then once you get some of the athletes who buy in and start improving, and becoming talented, they start to work together and pool together with each other because they're at the top, and they push each other to become better and better and better. And that's what the next level, the ones who weren't quite at the top, were able to train under, right? And so that becomes your training ground, because you get to see the best of the best working hard with each other, and then the other athletes who aren't quite there yet get to learn and observe from that for the next generation of that, right? And so I think that's the atmosphere that helped create the Fab Four that you talked about, where we had Brad Katona, Katie Saul, John Quinnett, and Brant Butt all on the national team training at the same time. And that's a good vibe. It's a good feeling. It feels good to be able to be a part of something that is doing so well. Like I say, that has now sort of transgressed into other things where Brant still gives back to the gym, and we still have relationships with every one of those four athletes, even though many of them, well, three out of the four, don't live in Winnipeg any longer. They're still connected to United. They're still a part of United, and where they can, they try to give back to United. And so that's I'm pretty proud of that as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool thing that, the gym has a home feeling. Like it's not just your standard gym. There's a community feel. There's like, I mean, we got together with the group in the summer there, and it just, it's great to catch up with everyone because it feels like you're a united family. And I
Yeah.
think that's really powerful, right? To have that. And there's some element of luck that you get these really talented people that are able to push each other together. But,
Yeah.
the other thing I wanted to address, something you were talking about as well, was pushing forward in the community. And this is where, you created the Melee at the Met, or now it's just called the Melee, but the Melee Gala. Let's talk about your vision for it and how it's evolved.
Yeah, so we started that in 2013, and it started as a vision of how best to attract people to our sport that I think are missing what our sport can offer, and so there's a lot of excitement in our sport. You go to some of the Melee galleys, and the level of excitement in that room, the level of atmosphere in that room is pretty special. And so that's really what I wanted to try to get, and try to put on a show that would wow people, and bring high level boxing, but also allow us to showcase our local talent, right? Particularly United's talent. And so, I was trying to find a way of balancing that together. And so, that involved some international boxing, of course, but then it turned into the corporate challenge. And so, originally the intent was, I think, to put some or all of the Fab Four on the show, but that was at or around the time where most were out of, not participating or competing anymore. And so, we didn't have the luxury of having, the Fab Four all on the Melee Gala, unfortunately, but we were able to develop the corporate challenge, which has, turned into a pretty interesting piece on its own, in terms of being able to showcase our sport in a real way, right? Where people, get to do it, get to go through the experience, get to train at a, pretty high level, and then compete on an international boxing show with some of the best fighters in the world. It's a pretty like a once in a lifetime opportunity across any sport, right? There's not many sports that offer you that chance to be able to compete on that kind of platform. And so, it's done, I think exactly what I wanted to, in terms of, bringing in people to the gym, bringing in awareness and notoriety about what we do, and also, making for a great event and raising lots of money for charity.
Yeah, so I can't remember what our quote was, but we got to be like over the years that you've done this, I feel like you're upwards to over $100,000 made almost, or is that I feel
Oh
like
yeah,
even more than
yeah,
that.
yeah. It's probably around there, just over in terms of money donated to charity. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, with a corporate challenge and creating that fundraising for the competitors and making it a
yeah,
competition and it's been just so cool to see that impact. And I love how you describe the energy because you remember me telling you the story about why I accepted the job at United was because of the energy that I had that night that I got to coach. And I remember, and I'm not gonna lie, over a couple of drinks I made that business decision to jump on board because how
yeah,
exciting that whole environment was and to give back and be there for the athletes. Like I think that's something I remember one of my first boxing coaches told me, he's like, you'd be surprised what you get out of the sport by being there for your athletes. And I think it's really
yeah,
powerful. And I mean, hopefully in a year or so we keep that melee at the Met going. Now I want to ask you
yeah.
one thing, and I know this is going to be it's such a kind of an open-ended or kind of a vague question, but you seem to have this mindset of ambition. And I say that because hey, we had a gym and the gym was going good. You had athletes, but then you're like, hey, I want something more. And now you're still pushing it. Now you're the president of Boxing Canada. Like, I'm just really curious. Is it because you feel like you're a busy mind? Like what gives you this do you have any idea what gives you such an internal drive to want to push yourself so much? I know it's a hard question to ask, but what do you feel like is internally in you?
I think I think it's about what I think I'm best at and how I think I can best help. And so you want to try to give in areas that are going to make the most impact, right? And so as it relates to boxing, when I retired and became on the board, a lot of ways I was sort of a free lawyer, right? I was just doing all the legal work but that turned into some bigger stuff in terms of thinking some of the legal work through and setting policy, for example, and what direction we're going to go. And so um, the more I got involved with that, the more experience I became. And I said, yeah, I can lead this organization. Like I think I am best placed to try to take this organization to the next level. And so, since I've taken over, it's caused me to spend a lot more time thinking about how to improve the sport in our country, right? Generally, how to improve the organization. And it takes me away from other things that it takes me away from the hand pad time that I could possibly be doing in the gym. But it's where I think I'm best placed to help at the highest level in terms of impact, across the board, right? And so sometimes those are tough decisions, right? You want to spend your time doing many things, but going back to our point, if you want to do something, and my view is do it right and give everything you have. And so when I elected to become president, I knew that was going to mean pulling away a little bit even more from having to coach at the gym, right? And so hopefully there'll be a day where I won't be president and I'll be back in the gym and back holding hand pads. But for right now, I think my time is best spent helping Boxing Canada at this moment in terms of what they need to do next.
Yeah, I think that summed it up so well off the bat. And this really does define the person that I know you are. Just the fact that you said that you're about serving people. So, you as a boxer was your discipline to what you're willing to do and perform. But now, you as an individual has been kind of now you're translating that into how can I help people? Because that was United, right? And how could you be a coach? How could you provide that for the environment? Melee at the Met was about a charity event and to display boxing, and now all the way to the point of being president, your mindset is how can I best serve the sport? How can I do the highest level thing? And I think that's a beautiful mindset, and I think that's something for people to take as a lesson. Is like ask yourself how are you able to serve people best, and I think that also probably guides you on saying no because as you're capable of more you actually the power of no is a very important thing, so you have that kind of in the back of your mind, right? Is like
Yeah.
I got to really go into where I'm best serving the people, right?
Right. Yeah. Just a couple of days ago, Boxing Canada got into a big dispute, and so they have what's called the SDRCC, the Sport Dispute Resolution Center of Canada. I've been involved in more Boxing Canada disputes before the SDRCC than I ever would tell you about. They're, it's a 50-hour dump of time, right? It's crazy intense. It's very sophisticated, very formal, a lot of time spent on it. And so we just got one that ramped up. And of course, Boxing Canada, the office always looks to me because I'm the lawyer. And so, it's basically free legal work. And I said, no, I said, no, I'm not doing it. I don't have the time. I'm now the president and I got to spend my time doing other things. I'll give you another lawyer and, I'll pass you on. But it's not going to be me because I just didn't think that was my time well spent, right? If I'm going to dump 50 hours of time, it'll be into my kid, or it'll be into, giving back to Boxing Canada in a way that I think would be better than just free legal advice. So, like I say, I don't say no often, but it was a recent example of me saying no, just because I didn't think it was the best use of my time.
Yeah, I think that's a great mindset. And I remember my sister described you as this very mindset driven person where you weren't afraid to accept challenges. Like if they asked you to do something, and for those who don't know, my sister initially worked with Ryan at the same firm, and someone would ask you to do something, you're absolutely yes if you believe it's best served. So I think that's an important lesson itself. So one really good question here is, in this crazy environment, because this is very true. Like, I mean, there's no time for you to do hand pads right now. Really, it's very hard to. This is a challenging question. What do you see in the sport within the next 6 months to a year, given COVID?
Yeah, we're in a sensitive time at a lot of levels in terms of our sport. I think we'll make it through no matter what, because I think there's interest in our sport across the board. The Olympics, our sport is one of the ones that are the most seen, the most viewed in terms of public attendance, and so the sport is strong, I think, at that level, and so we'll succeed. But there's a ton of challenges right at the domestic level, like in Manitoba, to the national level, to the international level. As you know, boxing is on the hinge in terms of its participation in the Olympics. The IOC is not very happy with us at all. It might be that AIBA, our international federation, dissolves real soon, and so would have to be replaced by some new organization, and presumably Boxing Canada would, become a part of that new organization. And so that's the international level. At the national level, now that I'm in the realms as president, I see a lot of need for improvement, and I'm working as hard as I can to try to fix as many things as I possibly can. But in part, it's going to be bridging the athlete stream and the coach stream up, right? So when you're coming up as a newbie, whether it's a coach or an athlete, understanding the pathway to get to the national team and to get to the Olympics, and make sure that that's a little bit more transparent and smooth. And at the local level, I think hopefully once vaccination rolls out and testing improves and whatnot, we'll hopefully be in a spot soon where we can get back into competition. There's going to be, I think, long-term effects on membership numbers, on, trying to make sure we retain and get back members who we have lost. We're going to be one of the sports the hardest to hurt in terms of COVID, just because of what we do and the combat aspect of it and the close range aspect of it. People will be able to participate in other sports before they will be able to compete in boxing. And that's a concern, right? Because, we lose talented athletes to other sports, and it's hard to then get them back later. So, I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think people got to work together and collaboratively to try to think of, ideas on how to, bring back people to the gym and make sure that we're, engaging with the membership and giving them something of value. And for those who are on the competitive stream, it's hard to train and not know when your next competition is going to be, right? To keep that focus. And so, I'm hopeful that real soon we'll be able to get at least a little bit of movement for those athletes in particular, for those athletes who are on the competitive stream who have just been sitting and waiting for over a year to try to get a competition. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get them back in the ring real soon.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it just really depends on where you live right now as far as the standards on handling COVID. Because I know
Yeah.
some people go to the States for sparring and they're
Yeah.
living down there, and meanwhile, some places in BC they allow some sparring to some extent, and then here
Right.
we can barely do hand pads.
Yeah.
So, are you? And this might be a tough question to answer, but is there a standardization coming where sparring will be allowed when people all have their shots, or is there any standardization for the vaccination or no?
I don't think there'll be a standard policy across Canada set by Boxing Canada anyway that dictates those things. I think that'll be dealt with at a provincial level. I think it needs to be dealt with at a provincial level. One of the things I am trying to work on is to make sure that we're properly working with the provinces. I've set up what's called the IPTC, the Interprovincial Committee, and so it's basically a committee of the provinces. And so I'm working to make sure that Boxing Canada and the IPTC group, the provinces, are working together to make sure that we're going in the right direction and to make sure that Boxing Canada is helping to support the provinces on some of these return to work or sorry return to play issues, right? And so I don't think we can dictate things at a national level. I think it has to be dealt with at a provincial level, but I think we can help and I think we can support and I think we should do as much as we can to deal with that.
Yeah, and I love that you did that because I remember you were talking about getting that going, and it's so important because each province is different, right? And even within the province, you got different boxing clubs. Or you're more northern Alberta or Manitoba versus southern, and you can't have all the same legislation, you can't have all the same rules. So
Right.
one of the things I know from locally, and is really challenging. Why do you what is the reasoning you think that it's so challenging for local fighters, especially here in Manitoba, to get fights?
Well, one because of the low numbers of the participants in the sport generally in Manitoba. Two, some level of disorganization with the office of Boxing Manitoba. Well, I'm not sure how well it's staffed or how well communications go out, but um, in terms of planning and organized events, as you know, with the melee, it's a lot of work, right? And so, um, you know, I don't see the I don't see Boxing Manitoba doing as much as I think that they need to do in terms of putting on and hosting on really good quality shows that athletes really want to participate in. And so I'm hoping that they'll do a little bit better. And with coaches, there still is that constant my gym's the best perspective where there's not really a lot of working together and cross training and sparring with each other. And I know there's restrictions now with COVID, but I think once those are gone, we need to work together. We need to, make sure that, an athlete who has no sparring partner in their own gym, they need a sparring partner. And if it happens to be at another gym, we need to try to get over that and try to, build the relationships to make that work so that, the athlete from two different gyms can still, along the lines of the things we talked about earlier, work together and grow from each other. Right. And so, you know, we, you sort of face the facts as you have them. And the fact is, we live in Manitoba in the center of the country. We don't have a big or strong provincial base of competitive team athletes. And so, when you get somebody who is wanting to get experience and wanting to improve and grow, I think it's important to look anywhere you can to try to get those competitive experiences for that athlete, right? In terms of sparring and growing with another athlete.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And, the numbers is a huge part, right? Because, if you're going to go look in Ontario or if you're going to look in Quebec, it's like that's why they develop some of the national
Yeah.
level athletes is
Yeah.
because their numbers are higher and, the organization there is inherently better. But one thing I do want to, just on the side of this so people understand when they're listening is that you as the president of Boxing Canada and everyone in that boxing organization, coaches and officials, are for free. And so
Yeah.
I don't think that like was like the fact that a referee or a judge is spending their Saturdays being yelled at by coaches. It blew me away. Like I remember being a ref for a hockey game, and it would be like peewee, like kids, And I'm like, this is too much. This is not worth my time. And yet people are
Right.
getting yelled at, and that's a tough job. And especially for
Yeah.
yourself as like the president of Boxing Canada, that's for free. So I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
just that has to go forth for people to appreciate how difficult it is to run these organizations like in your pastime, right?
Yeah. 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 It's, things come up and you always have to try to prioritize your other your other things, right? And so you have a wife, you have kids, you have work, you have other commitments, and so when things arise, you try to deal with them as best as you can. Sometimes things slip through the cracks, but generally you do the best you can, and that's all you can do.
Absolutely. Now, you had talked about that, and it's exactly where I wanted to go. Was the kids, they're growing. That's a new exciting part of your life. Now, again, these are some challenging questions, but what's some like fundamental principles that you hope to teach your children about maybe the work ethic, your experience in boxing? What's some things that you're hopefully going to instill in your kids as they grow up, maybe get into sports and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think some of the life lessons, that we chatted about earlier today are sort of what you want to focus on, and particularly my son is identical to me in terms of being that hyperactive kid who is buzzing around all the time, and so I think he, like I, is probably going to need something to to put his energy in, and hopefully something positive like a sport. I don't know that I'll push boxing on him, but he's loving it so far, and any kind of combat stuff, karate, judo, boxing. So I am sure he'll go down that path at some point. But regardless of through what sport it accomplishes, I think sport and individual sports, particularly and combat sports in particular, offer things that you might not get even in other sports, and certainly not in other aspects of life. And so, big fan of sports.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a part of a learning process that takes you outside of school. And then its own social culture and its own individual development from learning something, right?
Well, and like you say, like, just when I was an athlete, being coached, and how important the coach is, right? Like, the coaches who give their time for free, and those are the ones who help mold you as a person, almost as much as your parents, right? In terms of, when I was a kid, when my mom and dad would say, don't do something, you didn't want to listen because it was your parents. But when your coach told you not to do something, you listened because you knew, you had to, or you weren't going to get the benefit, the that you wanted. So coaches play a huge role on the development of kids, and so I think it's important to try to get them that experience.
Yeah, that's a very true statement I never really considered, but it's so true that, your parents have the influence on you when you're at home, and then when you have that coach that really is it's your very powerful influence in the person that you're trying to be. If it's a boxing coach, hockey
Yeah.
coach, it's like you're trying to be that person. So their
Right.
their identity and their influence is very valuable to you,
Yep.
right? Their
For sure.
information. So I,
For
I
sure.
definitely value that mentorship idea. So I think
Yeah.
that's really cool. How old are your kids now?
4 and 6. Yeah.
Okay, so Hunter's
Yeah.
getting big, eh?
That's getting big. Yeah. He can't wait to get back in the gym, and obviously when things are safe, we're hoping to get him back in, and I think he'll be training with the team.
Oh man, that's exciting. I'm excited to see him in there. So he's already been doing some boxing with you in the shadow boxing and stuff. You got a bag set
Yeah.
up?
Yeah, I got a bake set up right now. It's in my house. We're just trying to fix up my garage at the moment. That'll get done soon. But yeah, no, he's working on the bag a little bit, and we have a set of gloves, and so he puts on the gloves, and we do some hand pads every now and again. So he's loving it.
That's awesome. That's great. So, I'll wrap it up here because you did give me a lot of time here. Great information. Thank you so much for this. I always like to leave off with, where your current ambition is. What's like a real challenge for you, and you kind of described it with a lot of things. But what comes to the top of your mind right now for your most powerful ambition you're going to?
Yeah, we're working on trying to do the best I can as president. There's a ton of things going on right now, so we're at a pretty critical point in time, and so in terms of immediate focus, right now it's on making sure the boat is going the right direction with Boxing Canada. That's the immediate focus. I've got some short midterm goals in terms of improving as a lawyer and trying to get into some areas of law that I haven't explored much lately, like mediation, for example, and stuff like that. And then as a parent, just trying to make sure you're present with your kids and not not always looking at your phone or too busy to spend time with the kids. And so it just goes back to breaking things out, right? Work time is work time and playtime is playtime with the kids. And so it's a constant struggle to trying to separate that to make sure you're present when you should be. So those are some of the things I'm working on.
Yeah, I think that's something I always admire so much about you is that, when you were just, that's like, I got to spend time with kids. Like, this is kids' time. And I find, for myself too, just as trying to run my own business, if you stay wrapped up in your own business, you never feel like you get a break from it. So being able to commit that time psychologically, like I'm with my kids, like that'll take you away from that, take you, and you reload better to show up for work more, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, Ryan. This has been a great chat. We got some really good answers, some great perspective. You're wiser than you know. You definitely are. You got some great nuggets there. I definitely, you always come with a handful more quotes for me to pull from. So I enjoy it, and thank your time. We're definitely going to do this again sometime. Next time it'll be boxing and beers. We'll just talk about the sport of boxing. I'll have a beer, you have a beer, and we'll talk about strategies and training and all that stuff. Sound good?
Perfect. Sounds great.
Okay, well, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate all your time. You have a great day.
Okay, buddy. Talk soon.
Well, thank you again to Ryan Savage for joining us today. That was a great conversation, as it always is with that man. He's got these beautiful nuggets of wisdom when I talk to him, and he doesn't even mean to, but I think that's a real sign of wisdom. Someone not trying to be, but just looking at life in a very simplistic way, and it has a lot of knowledge to it, because when it comes down to it, in order to be successful, it's not a complicated thing. It's what your mindset gets you to do, something simple but challenging. And it's really his lifestyle, it's really his premise. And I think there's an important lesson for everyone to take, and that is, where are you best served to help people, right? That's such a powerful statement for me and what I do for a living. And so that's why I do this podcast, because I hope to help people. I hope to reach out and get information from people to share with others. And look into your own life and wonder to yourself, how are you trying to actively help people in the best way possible, right? And so even saying no at the right time so that you can put effort into other things. So it was a great podcast. Honestly, I felt like that was a lot of good lessons even for myself, and I hope you got something from it. Remember to like and subscribe, leave a review, and tell other people about the podcast. Spread the word, help get this thing off the ground. And if you want more information, I always try to provide anything around exercise, mindset, and nutrition on my website. It's rqtrainingnutrition.ca/NEM forum. You hop on there and you're going to see at least 3 different articles all the time, and I'm always updating new ones in there. And you also sign up for my newsletter, where I always try to provide more information and great thoughts around that perspective. So thank you very much for joining today. And remember, it is not about the pursuit of happiness, but it's the happiness within pursuit.